I'm Nima Rajan. With just days left before Monday's federal election, the country's three main party leaders kept campaigning today in eastern and central Canada. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau was back home in Montreal. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was in the Maritimes, starting the day in St. John, New Brunswick. And NDP leader Jagmeet Singh continued campaigning in Ontario, starting in Toronto. A hot topic on the campaign trail yesterday turned out to be affordability. This after Statistics Canada reported inflation hit a nearly two-decade high in August. Prices increased by 4.1% last month compared to a year earlier. This was fueled by rising consumer demand and pandemic-spawned supply chain constraints for many goods. Liberal leader Justin Trudeau says he will tackle affordability with housing and childcare measures. NDP leader Jagmeet Singh and Conservative leader Erin O'Toole blame inaction from the Liberals for the rising prices. Meanwhile, the two front-runners in the federal election have turned back the clock, hoping for a bump in voter support. Conservative leader Erin O'Toole was joined on the campaign trail Wednesday evening by former Prime Minister Brian Mulroney. Tuesday night saw Liberal leader Justin Trudeau get an on-stage welcome from former Prime Minister Jean Chrétien. Recent poll numbers indicate that the Liberals and Tories are tied with the support of 32% of decided voters ahead of the September 20th election. A Scotiabank analysis of federal election campaign platforms finds the spending plans from each party could put more pressure on prices and interest rates. That could ultimately hurt the pocketbooks of voters. Statistics Canada says prices increased by 4.1% last month compared with August 2020. The federal government has pumped billions of dollars in aid to hard-hit families, spurring demand for goods and services. But the supply of those goods and services has yet to catch up. The Canadian Real Estate Association is now predicting fewer home sales this year due to tight supply conditions and increasing home prices. Its latest forecast predicts 656,300 homes will change hands this year. This is up almost 19% from a year ago, but down nearly 4% from its forecast earlier this year. The new forecast shows the national average home price is now expected to reach $680,000 this year, which is up 19.9% from last year. The Indigenous Tourism Association of Canada is making a bleak prediction. This is about the ability of its members to rapidly recover from the COVID-19 pandemic. The association says Indigenous tourism operations are not expected to return to pre-pandemic levels until at least 2028. A report from the association and the Conference Board of Canada says the pandemic has had a deep and serious impact on most Indigenous tourism operators. The board estimates at least one-third of the businesses that took part in its recent surveys could still be at risk of closure by next year. Based on satellite imagery, canola output across the prairies is expected to be down about 2 million tons from just 2 weeks ago. The drought and extreme July heat had a much bigger effect on canola yields in Saskatchewan than in Alberta and Manitoba. Statistics Canada is also estimating that the spring wheat crop will be just 15.3 million tons. This would be the smallest total since 2007. Lentil and pea crop production are also down. Industry experts say North American lumber prices have come down even faster than they went up. This was due to a pandemic-driven surge in home renovations and do-it-yourself projects. Consumers had been facing prices 3 times higher than they were before COVID-19, but the pandemic price bubble burst with the easing of some restrictions. Some retailers say they are now selling lumber for what they would have before the boom. However, experts say lumber prices will likely increase throughout the fall. Refugee claimants and their advocates are asking the Supreme Court of Canada to review a decision that affirmed the constitutionality of the Safe Third Country Agreement. The key pact between Ottawa and Washington on asylum seekers took effect in 2004. It allows Canada to turn back potential refugees who arrive at land ports of entry along the Canada-US border. This is on the basis that they must pursue their claims in the United States. A First Nation on the Manitoba-Ontario boundary has clean running water for the first time in nearly 25 years. The federal government has lifted a long-term boil water advisory for Shoal Lake 40 First Nation. The First Nation was cut off from the mainland more than a century ago. This was during construction of an aqueduct that supplies Winnipeg with its drinking water. In 2019, a road was finally built to connect the community to the mainland. Construction on a water treatment plant began soon after. All right, stay tuned. We'll be right back with Forum Daily's weekly market update with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here, coming up next. That and, of course, more news from around the world, only on Forum Daily News. So stay tuned. We'll be back after some short messages. We return to the Forum Daily's weekly market update segment with Catherine Murray, the host of The Buck Stops Here.
Thanks, Nima, and welcome to your weekly market recap. I'm Catherine Murray. Markets on Wednesday of this week broke 5 down day sessions. In fact, it was the best day we've seen since late August. We did see a broad-based rally in tech shares as well as energy shares. Those are where we saw some key gains. Energy stocks certainly rallying following the price of WTI or crude up over 3%, the best level we've seen in crude since July 30th on the back of inventory drawdowns. There has been a real shift in terms of investor interest in energy stocks in the sector over the past 6 months or so, really recognizing that there's been an underinvestment in energy and the companies over the past number of years, leading to a decrease in supply just at the time when we have a reopening trade going on and therefore an increase in demand. From an analyst research perspective, Canaccord did increase their price targets on ARC Resources, New Vista, as well as Tourmaline. We're also seeing some interest and some gains in financial stocks, as well as basic materials. Keep your eyes on some of those stocks. Alcoa, for one, was up by 7% this week. It got an upgrade over at one of the research firms. Also, Steel Dynamics up over 5% on the back of stronger than expected earnings results. We are hearing, of course, from various press releases that manufacturers are facing the highest steel and aluminum prices that they've seen in years. We're also seeing some nice strength in industrial stocks, really led by the railroads. Big news this week from a headline perspective that Kansas City Southern and CP are concluding or executing a $27 billion merger or takeover of Kansas City. This ends a month-long rivalry between CP and CN for the coveted railway, that being Kansas City Southern. Stepping back a little bit here, when we think about the markets right now, you've got to really take a look at the push and pull or the tug of war between the bulls and the bears. And quite frankly, there is a case for both. So it's highly debated. Let's start with the bear case, though. There is the expectation that we'll see, and this is pretty much across the board in North America, Canada, the United States, and perhaps even around the world, an increase in taxes, increase in regulation, peaking growth. We did have some weaker than expected economic data as of late, although retail sales today were strong. Also, of course, concerns that the U.S. Federal Reserve will taper, pull back their bond buying or stimulus program just at the time when we have a slowdown in growth. That is leading to concerns about stagflation. So higher prices and slower growth doesn't really bode well for risk on assets such as the equity markets and or any other asset class, quite frankly. We're also, of course, seeing inflation here in Canada, 4.1%, higher than expectations. That was for August, higher than what we saw in July, which is 3.7, and the highest inflation numbers that we've seen since 2003. That all at a time, again, where growth is somewhat questionable. And of course, importantly as well, there's an election coming up, and affordability is certainly a key election issue to be cognizant of. Now, the bull case, though, is that corporate results, corporate profits are in fact resilient. We do have a reopening trade, even though it might be a bit delayed because of the Delta variant. JP Morgan is out there saying that the slowdown is in fact temporary. You also have what's called TINA. There is no alternative, and therefore investors continue to buy the dips when we see it in the equity markets. Add to that, famous investor Ray Dalio was out just this week on a news network saying that cash is trash. In other words, you're not earning any money by keeping your cash uninvested. From a headline perspective, a couple of key items to watch for and that we've heard about: initial jobless claims south of the border to come in better than expected, or sorry, worse than expected. Moderna is out saying that there's new data supporting booster shots. At the same time, the FDA seems to think that the current amount of vaccine provides enough protection. So that's something to watch for as we think about COVID and where we go next there. Also, just be aware that the casino stocks have been under some significant pressure, the ones specifically with exposure to Macau on the back of China looking to increase their oversight of licenses. And what to watch for next week. This is going to be really important. We've got the FOMC meeting, and we will see To what degree they might want to taper the bond buying program, I have to wonder whether or not that's kind of priced into the market or if we get a bit of a pullback. And then, of course, the Canadian election is going to be very key and critical in terms of how friendly the government policies are towards business and growth here in Canada. Lastly, just a couple comments on cryptocurrencies. Of course, crypto has been catching a little bit of a bid lately. That is, though, following some weakness that we saw following El Salvador rolling it out. But I think that was really due to leverage and unwinding of positions, according to the traders I speak to. So be aware of that, as well as the SEC taking a quicker and deeper look at wanting to regulate cryptocurrencies. That does it for me for your weekly market recap. Nima, back to you.
Thanks for that, Catherine. We've got stories from around Canada coming up next on the Forum Daily, so stay tuned. We'll be right back after a short break. As the number of COVID-19 hospitalizations continues to rise in BC, more than half of those patients are in intensive care. The province says of the 288 people who are hospitalized, 137 are in ICU and 7 more deaths have been reported. It says people who were not fully vaccinated accounted for over 87% of cases. This was in the 2-week period between August 31st and September 13th. After factoring for age, the unvaccinated are nearly 38 times more likely to be hospitalized than those who received both doses of a vaccine. Well, meanwhile, the mayors of 2 British Columbia cities are denouncing assaults against at least 4 officers in the BC capital in the last couple of weeks. Victoria Mayor Lisa Helps and Esquimalt Mayor Barb Desjardins says officers are working in extremely challenging circumstances and need to be kept safe. 3 officers have been assaulted this week alone. This includes one who was headbutted and another who was spat on. This was after responding to a report of a man kicking a building and smashing bottles. Alberta Premier Jason Kenney has declared a state of public health emergency. He also reinstated restrictions that he lifted on July 1st. This comes as the provincial health system is facing a COVID-19 crisis. Alberta has over 18,000 active COVID-19 cases, which is the highest in the country, and 269 patients are in intensive care in a system set up for only 173. Most of those ICU patients have COVID-19. The vast majority are unvaccinated or partially so. Mr. Kenney says the province may run out of staff and intensive care beds within 10 days. The Saskatchewan Teachers Federation says the province's decision to allow students who are close contacts of COVID-positive peers to remain in school is illogical. The province says students exposed to COVID-19 in school can continue to go to class if they wear a mask, but they must self-isolate if they are exposed to the virus by someone outside of school. The public health order says the aim is to allow children to continue in-person learning. This and to prevent parents from having to take time off work. But Federation leader Patrick Mays says the policy fails to protect students. Manitoba will offer 3rd doses of COVID-19 vaccine to those whose immune systems have been moderately to severely weakened due to medical conditions or treatment. The province will also offer 3rd doses for travel purposes and for individuals who have received 1 or 2 doses of a vaccine that is not approved by Health Canada. Ontario's government is under the spotlight. This is after the Financial Accountability Office questioned the lack of spending coming from the province's new $2.7 billion COVID-19 pandemic response program. The office says no spending occurred from the fund in the first quarter of fiscal 2021, and that health spending was $691 million lower than planned in the area of population and public health. Health authorities in Montreal say they are looking to open more testing clinics and deploy rapid testing as COVID-19 cases and hospitalizations rise. Montreal Public Health Director Mylene Drouin says the aim is to avoid what she called unreasonably long wait times outside COVID-19 testing centers in the city. Nova Scotia's health authority says hospitals are experiencing higher than normal visits to emergency rooms and demand for beds, resulting in service delays. The authority is blaming the pressure on considerable staffing challenges. This includes a shortage of nurses that has been made worse by the pandemic. As a result, it says further reductions will be made to surgical capacity in the Halifax area and in the province's northern health zone. PEI is reimposing mask requirements in indoor and public spaces. The decision comes following a recent COVID-19 outbreak at a Charlottetown school. Chief Public Health Officer Dr. Heather Morrison says the renewed rule comes into effect tomorrow morning. The mask mandate will target retail businesses, salons, taxis, and public transit, places of worship, as well as workplaces that are open to the public. Newfoundland and Labrador's health minister says the province's upcoming vaccine passport will not be mandatory. John Haggie says it will be up to individual businesses whether or not they are used. Premier Andrew Furey announced last week that the province would introduce vaccine passports modeled on those used by Quebec. The BC government says customers at the province's liquor and cannabis stores donated more than $1.45 million to the Canadian Red Cross. This to help residents affected by wildfires. That amount will be matched by both the province and the federal government for a total exceeding $4 million. The BC Liquor Distribution Branch is an official disaster relief supporter for the Red Cross. Its next fundraising campaign in both liquor and cannabis stores will be in support of food banks. All right, stay with us. We're going to take a look at news from around the world after the break. Australia, the UK, and the US have formed a new alliance. France claims to have neutralized a leader of the Islamic State group, and the United Nations dismisses all peacekeepers from Gabon operating in the Central African Republic. U.S. President Joe Biden has announced that the United States is forming a new Indo-Pacific security alliance with Britain and Australia. It will allow for greater sharing of defense capabilities. It's a move that could deepen tensions in U.S.-China relations. Mr. Biden says bolstering resources will help keep the peace in the region. There is no official word on whether Canada will be involved. Australian Prime Minister Scott Morrison says his government decided to invest in U.S. nuclear-powered submarines. He says the government is ending its contract with France to build diesel-electric submarines. This is because of a changed strategic environment. U.S. President Joe Biden had earlier announced a new security alliance with Australia and Britain. It will develop an Australian nuclear-powered submarine fleet. France's president says the head of the Islamic State in the Greater Sahara has been killed. Announced in a tweet, Emmanuel Macron says the successful military operation is a major win for French forces in the region. The French military has been fighting Islamic extremists in the Sahel region since intervening in Mali in 2013. The UN Security Council is encouraging Egypt, Ethiopia, and Sudan to resume talks on the issue of water availability. The issue has arisen due to the dam that the Ethiopians are building on the main tributary of the Nile River. The dam is 80% complete. Egypt and Sudan contend it threatens 150 million people downstream. Ethiopia says the $5 billion dam is essential to make sure the vast majority of its people have electricity. An Indonesian court has ruled that President Joko Widodo and 6 top officials have neglected to fulfill citizens' rights to clean air, and it has ordered them to improve the poor air quality in the capital. The Central Jakarta District Court panel voted 3-0 in favor of the group. They are made up of 32 residents of Jakarta who sued the president, 3 cabinet ministers, and the governors of Jakarta, Banten, and West Java. Tesla has sidestepped American car dealership laws by setting up shop on Native American land for the first time. This could be a model for Tesla to sell vehicles in states that require car companies to sell through dealerships. The tribe has welcomed the Tesla store that opened last week. They are calling it an environmentally conscious employer. Car dealers say consumers should buy electric vehicles from companies that follow state laws. Philippine President Rodrigo Duterte's top legal advisor says the International Criminal Court is being used as a pawn. Chief Presidential Legal Counsel Salvador Panelo says the court is being used by the president's political foes. This is ahead of an election. The court decided to investigate allegations of crimes against humanity during his war on drugs. According to President Duterte's spokesman, the president says, quote, he will die first before he faces any international courts. Thousands of people in El Salvador are marching against the government of President Nayib Bukele. The demonstration entered on fears that Mr. Bukele may try to re-elect himself in 2024. Protests also voiced concern about the president's concentration of power and the decision to make Bitcoin legal tender. Protesters also say Mr. Bukele has weakened the independence of the courts. UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres is ordering the entire peacekeeping contingent from Gabon that are serving in the Central African Republic. This follows credible reports of sexual abuse by some of its 450 members and past allegations. The United Nations has long been in the spotlight over allegations of child rape and other sexual abuses by peacekeepers, especially in Central African Republic and Congo. The EU's executive branch is asking member states to do better to protect journalists and media workers. The European Commission says 908 journalists and media workers were attacked across the 27-nation bloc in 2020. A total of 23 journalists have been killed in the EU since 1992. This with the majority of killings taking place over the past 6 years. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that Facebook, Instagram's parent company, downplayed research about how the app makes some teens feel about themselves. The Journal reports that according to an internal presentation from March of last year, 32% of teen girls said when they feel bad about their bodies that Instagram made them feel worse. Another slide said teens blame Instagram for increases in the rate of anxiety and depression. Instagram responded to the report by saying it is developing tools to help users combat negative feelings. All right, that'll do it for your look at national and international news for today. For more news on demand, you could always visit our website, thenewsforum.ca, and make sure to follow us on our social media handles on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You could also watch all of our commentary programming on the News Forum YouTube channel. All right, thank you for watching The Forum Daily with us. I'm Nima Rajan. Take care, Canada. We'll see you next time.